This is the Daily Tech News for Wednesday, May 21st, 2025. We tell you what you need to know. We follow up on context, and we give it our darndest to help each other understand.
Today, we get Jason Howell's on-the-scene overview on Google I.O., plus Epic wins again. Fortnite is back in Apple's U.S. App Store.
But for how long? I'm Tom Merritt.
I'm Jenn Cutter.
Let's start with what you need to know with the big story. Tuesday, Apple approved Fortnite for distribution in the U.S. App Store. Now, we could just leave it right there, and that would be the news. But I know some of you have been following this along with us. Some of you have not. So, previously on Apple versus Epic, I'll try to keep this as short as possible. But here's the summary. Apple suspended Epic's U.S. developer account in 2020 and removed Fortnite from the App Store in 2020 after Epic violated Apple's policies by putting a third-party payment option in the app without approval. They just did it. Apple and Epic went to court, and Apple won. The judge said, no, you can't just put your third-party thing in there in violation of policy. You can't do this, you can't do that. However, there was one provision that the judge put in that required Apple to let developers link out to other ways to pay outside the app. Now, separate to that case, in the European Union, the Digital Markets Act came into being in that time period and required Apple to let users load third-party apps in third-party app stores. And Epic started its own third-party app store in the EU. That is different than the U.S. situation. Anyway, that brings us to this week when Epic said that Apple wouldn't approve its submission of Fortnite to the U.S. App Store, even though it used its legitimate European Union account, which is not suspended, to submit it. Apple said it wanted to wait for its appeal of a judge's ruling that Apple had to let the links go directly out without taking a cut. It was appealing that. Epic filed a complaint with the judge saying they don't get to drag their heels on this, do they? And the judge wrote a brief, terse opinion that no, they don't. Apple knew what it should do. And if it wanted to appear in court to argue about it, Apple could name the person responsible for the decision, which most court followers said implied there might be a question of contempt of court for that person. Apple, not wanting contempt of court charges, approved the app without comment. So Fortnite now in the U.S. App Store. But that's not all. Roll credits, and here's the post-credit scene on this story. Late Tuesday, Microsoft filed what's called an amicus brief. That means we're not part of this, but we're friends of somebody in this, and we want our opinion to be considered in the decision. In the appeal of the ruling that forces Apple to let apps link out, Microsoft says in its filing that it wanted to offer an Xbox mobile web store that would link out to web to purchase in-app items, but Apple has not allowed that. It hasn't resubmitted it since this latest decision, but it also didn't allow Microsoft to let people stream games they buy in the Xbox mobile app. Microsoft could do that all now under the latest court order, but wants to make sure that the whole system doesn't get changed on appeal before it does. So Microsoft explaining why it hasn't made changes that it is currently allowed to. Microsoft wrote, Microsoft's own experience managing app stores confirms that Apple's policies could be restored if Apple ultimately prevails on appeal. This, by the way, also sheds a little light on why Netflix might not have added its own links out to buy Netflix subscriptions. But there we are, Jen. Fortnite in the iOS App Store. However, it might not stay there depending on how that appeal goes.
Yeah, it is extremely specific to the U.S. App Store. The second the news broke, I was like, yes, I'm going to go search this in the Canadian App Store, which of course didn't show up. Now, also, it takes a while for things to get refreshed in databases. So Epic had a direct link to the U.S. App Store link because it wasn't showing up in searches for American users either. But yeah, in Canada, the app is still not available, and it is only slowly showing up in search results for U.S. users today. I am sad. Canadian will continue to get ignored unless we also start yelling at
I think
Apple.
Canada's not alone in that. The EU has its rules, the US has this court order, but Apple can still throw around its policies anywhere else where it doesn't have one of these cases going on.
Yeah, it's choosing to be hyper-specific, as the judge said, knock that off. But yes, that does not apply to Canada. And Microsoft being very careful here. Like, I can almost guarantee, again, based on nothing, that Microsoft has this ready to go. They can hit go and submit this anytime they want. But they're choosing to be like, hey, we're just going to put this out there so that everyone knows. And we'll see what happens next.
I have a feeling they also are like, we don't want to do a bunch of work to put this out and then have it pulled. Like, let's wait until this is fully resolved, which is, I think, what's going on with Netflix as well. I'm curious if it does show up in the Canadian App Store. Let us know.
Yes.
I'm going to guess it doesn't, but should it bubble up somehow? That would be interesting to find out.
DTNS is made possible by you, the listener. Thanks to Howard Yermish, John Atwood, Pat, and Dennis Johansson.
Yay!
Woo.
There's more we need to know today. Let's get right to the briefs.
Google I.O. continues, which means the news continues. For example, Google announced that Volvo will be the first to get the Gemini chatbot in its cars. Drivers will be able to use natural language to get navigation help, find specific locations, and get answers from the vehicle manual. While Gemini is also coming to Android Auto for any installation, Volvo is adding it to its installation of this similarly named Android Automotive, which runs more than just the info screen. Volvo's installation will serve as a reference design for other car makers, which, among other things, means Volvo drivers will get the new features first.
Yeah. That's a good get for Volvo. I know that Android Automotive distinction is so confusing, especially because of the names, but it runs at a more fundamental level, the entire system, not just what shows up in that little infotainment screen. So, but good for Volvo users to be able to get that Gemini goodness in there, right? If you work in visual effects or generative model development, pay attention to this, because this is about workstations. This is about beefy desktops. This is about stuff that's not even just a gaming machine. This is about things for the enterprise. AMD announced some details about its 9000 series Threadripper workstation CPUs at Computex. The series moves to AMD's Zen 5 micro architecture, which launched with the 9000 series desktop processors last summer, and has also come to AMD's EPYC data processors. That's EPYC with a Y, not EPYC with an I. These high-end desktop and workstation versions that were announced today will be available with between 12 to 96 cores. That'll be the most cores you can get in an AMD 9000 series. They'll release in July. No price on those yet. AMD also teased new workstation R9 700 GPUs with the RDNA 4 graphics architecture and 32 gigabytes of VRAM. AMD says, and there's a lot of good information about why this may or may not be an exaggeration, but AMD says they outperform Intel's Arc Pro B60 and NVIDIA's RTX 5080 at AI tasks. Those will also launch in July.
Amazon has begun issuing refunds for items returned by customers as far back as 2018. This seems to be the source of a one-time $1.1 billion charge mentioned in Amazon's earnings call on May 1st that was also attributed to stockpiling ahead of tariffs. In emails to customers, Amazon said it had been unable to verify the correct items had been returned, but could have notified these customers more clearly and earlier to better understand the status and help us resolve the return. Given the time elapsed, we've decided to err on the side of customers and just complete refunds for these returns.
So the optimistic reading is Amazon realized that it had made this mistake and made it good. The pessimistic reading is, wonder if somebody threatened to sue them if they didn't do this. So they did it for everybody.
This is the nuisance cost and is worth it just to say, like, hey, let's get the good press instead of the bad press.
Yeah, exactly. MIT Technology Review has done a comprehensive analysis of how much energy is being used by AI-related processes, and I cannot recommend highly enough if you really want to understand this issue, and you don't just want scare tactics, and you don't just want overly optimistic platitudes, read this article. We will have it in the show notes, or just go to technologyreview.com. Here's a few things that I gleaned from reading it. From 2005 to 2017, energy use by data centers remained fairly flat thanks to increases in energy efficiency. So we were increasing our use of data centers, but the energy efficiency kept pace with that increase, and so the energy use didn't rise very much. However, between 2017 and 2023, the energy use of data centers doubled. A study by Berkeley Labs estimates that data centers now use about 4.4% of energy in the United States. So I've seen much bigger numbers bandied about. That's not a small number, but that's an accurate number. While that does not separate the AI from the non-AI use, given the fact that everything was pretty even until 2017, AI probably contributes a large portion of that rise. The report is a comprehensive look at what models are, what we know and don't know about their energy use, how queries affect energy use, and what fuels are used to provide power for the data centers. So trying to figure out, like, what is the actual energy impact here? We know it's rising, but how fast is it rising? How fast is it likely to rise? And when you type in a query, does it really use a lot of energy? For example, the report notes that queries vary widely in how much energy they use. So you can see some really pessimistic estimates, but that depends on which energy grid the data center is tied to, what time of day the query is made, what kind of query it is, what model it's using. Queries can be very small and often are, but some queries are much larger. So again, it's more complex than just saying every time you type in a query, X happens. The short answer is that companies need to be transparent if we want to have accurate estimates of the coming increases in power consumption, because they are going to increase. And it would be good to know for planning and to reduce emissions to know how much they're going to increase. However, the companies are not being transparent. That's the big problem here. Let's focus on that. Also, governmental agencies have not kept up with this. For example, the U.S. Energy Information Administration projects energy use for industries like mining and construction. It probably, according to Technology Review, should treat AI energy use as its own sector as well, so we can get accurate projections there from the data that administration has. Without this kinds of transparency, without this kind of detail, it's going to be difficult to manage the increase.
I'm of the belief that people are good and people are trying to make changes for the environment and the health of the local areas. But when people throw around numbers like 4.4%, it's like, okay, great. What does that mean for me? What is it measured in? What is my house normally using? You have to generally use special tools or really read your bills to find that out. And Canada gets a lot of its energy from hydro. So it's like, okay, are we doing worse for the environment or doing better? Is it solar? Is it gas? We've heard about older coal factories being put back into use. I really hope that this gets sorted out and government agencies take this seriously.
Yeah, this report is so good because it's not trying to paint this as an insolvable problem, but it's also pointing out that it can be really bad. Like some of those pessimistic estimates maybe aren't accurate, but do show us, like, if we don't know, we could end up doing that. And so what they're saying is there are lots of ways to solve this problem that aren't just don't use AI, that there are a lot of benefits that come from this, and telling individuals to not use queries isn't likely to work and also could have negative effects of its own. So let's actually get transparency from companies so we know where their power use comes from, and not just be like, we're going to make a deal with a nuclear plant, because that can actually end up driving up costs for everybody else if they strike a very beneficial deal for the tech company that the energy company then has to raise rates to make up for. So this is a very complex issue, and I was very glad to see Technology Review being one of the first outlets I've seen to really treat this as a data problem and say, here's what we know, here's what we don't know, and there's a lot we don't know. And the key to solving this and making sure that we have enough energy and that it doesn't increase emissions is to get that transparency.
Yeah, I think I speak for a lot of people where the most thing we know about power is, we try to run appliances late at night when it's cheaper.
Yeah, right. And I guess making your queries late at night when it's cheaper could help. But if the data center's halfway around the world in the middle of the day, well, then you don't know. So it's not something easily solved by your own actions alone.
Updates are now rolling out to Aura smart rings that improve their movement measurements like step counts. The update can tell which movements are from steps and which are not with better precision. This will likely mean that Aura users' step counts will drop, but they will be more accurate as the trade-off. Among other improvements, calorie burn estimates will include the intensity of movements along with heart rate. This may also drop calorie burn estimates.
Yeah, accuracy can be a problem sometimes, but it's good to see. NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang was pretty blunt in criticisms of U.S. restrictions on chips going to China in a news conference at Computex on Wednesday. You would expect that. NVIDIA is not making as much money when they can't sell chips to China. But here's what he said. Limiting NVIDIA chips from being sold to Chinese companies has spurred Chinese development of competitors. He said, quote, export controls gave them the spirit and government support accelerated their development. Our competition is intense in China. He pointed out, we sold 95% of the chips for this kind of stuff before the controls. Now we sell 50%. So you haven't necessarily achieved your aim. If your aim was to impede China from development, you've encouraged it. He also noted that the U.S. ban on selling H20 chips, which were already degraded versions, reduced U.S. tax income by $3 billion.
Hacker YTM Elysium has successfully ported a large language model called Llama 2.c to the Commodore 64. Yes, you heard that right. It runs the 260K Tiny Stories model, which lets you create a prompt that the model will then turn into a children's story. It is slow, but it runs on the Commodore 64.
C64. I always love this, like running modern tech on an old thing, especially the C64, which is close to my heart as the second computer I ever had. Those are the essentials for today. Let's dive a little deeper into what happened at Google I.O. this week.
Google I.O. has been all about AI. Jason Howell is at I.O. and talked to some folks at Google about what that means, especially for search. Take it away, Jason.
Hey, it's Jason Howell. And I'm actually all done with my day at Google I.O. It is actually pretty late in the evening. It's been a long day, as Google I.O. day ones usually are. I'm sure you guys have talked a lot already on the show about some of the announcements from Google I.O. And I thought I'd just give just a few minutes of perspective on what it felt like to be there, kind of the general tenor of, the announcements and the interpretations that people were kind of walking away from the event with after such an AI heavy event. Because I mean, any way you slice it, it really seems like Google I.O., especially this year, it's not the first year that this has happened, but especially this year, has become an AI event. Yes, it's still for developers, but it's from a very different perspective. It's artificial intelligence is seeping into all of Google's products and, has been for a while, but now even more so. And during the keynote, I even put out, I think on Twitter, just saying, like, if you are the person, who hates hearing about new AI news, then you absolutely can't stand this keynote, because it's entirely filled with nothing but AI. I can't even tell you that there was an announcement that didn't involve AI to some degree. And I think at the end of the day, that really explains where Google is at right now. Some people have looked at Google and its early kind of pioneering work in artificial intelligence, and then to see Google somewhat put onto the back burner in favor of, the then up and comers, now dominating companies like OpenAI and, Anthropic and the other new names that have come much later than Google to the AI space. I think a lot of people, kind of perceived Google's place in AI as being behind, even though they shouldn't be, even though they were there a lot earlier. And why isn't Google competing to the same degree? And it almost felt this year like Google was saying, hey, by the way, we aren't only still here doing AI, but everything that we do has something to do with the advancements that we're making with artificial intelligence. There was so much talk about that in the keynote, really kind of, showing off the different placements and the different leaderboards as far as how impactful and effective these AI models are. Also seeing a lot of collection of their various disparate services into one kind of cup or one kind of container. I spoke with Nick Fox, who leads the search team at Google and really has been one of the primary forces driving AI mode, which Google talked about immensely during the keynote. And, we talked a little bit about how these tools are all combining the powers and the abilities of all these services that users, power users have been really investing themselves in over the years. If you're a Google Power user, you've got your docs in Drive, and you've got your emails filling up a gigantic stack, of storage in Gmail, and you've got all of your information, your search history, your knowledge graph, all this stuff spread out amongst all of Google's various, directions. And now they're really seeming to kind of double down on using the AI to be the connective tissue between it all. And this isn't new. We've heard about these services, potentially at some point having the ability, and Gemini can do a little bit of this, of reaching into these different things. But now you've got it going into search. And, I think my comment to Nick was, is search a suite of apps, or is, or are all these things, kind of combining into one? Like, how do we look at that? And of course, his response to that is, if Google is doing its job the way they want to be doing, combining these things, it's not a matter of a suite of apps or a suite of services. It all combines into a singular thing that feeds everything. And of course, a large part of that is, as a user, you have to be okay with this, and you need to kind of give the thumb up and say, all right, I'm okay with, sharing all of this information and all of this knowledge about me into these systems, into search, into Gemini, in order to gain the benefit of that kind of, that reachability of that information by these services. And of course, Google hopes that many, many people choose to do that. I'm happy that they're still leaving it in the hands of the individual to do that. I think another, kind of curiosity that I have, especially as far as AI into search, is, AI mode, as it is right now, is a separate place. Now, granted, everybody has access to this. You can jump into it. You can choose to use it and, use it in place of search, or, as a complement to your normal search habits. But I thought it was really interesting during the keynote. I can't remember who it was who said that AI mode is the future of search, basically stating that, like, this is the direction that search is going. And that has me wondering, okay, well, at what point does AI mode become search? Right now, it's an option. Right now, it's something you can choose to test and play around with and see, why you use it over something else. At what point is it just the way search is? And does that combination, does that, perceived complexity have, the potential of harm against the property that is Google's bread and butter, search driving ads? And people look at search, and, it's been a long time since the 12 blue links or whatever it was called, but people look at Google search forever and have thought, the reason that it was effective is because A, it brought you to the place that was the best match. And B, it was simple. It was easy to understand. It wasn't cluttered. It wasn't, trying to do all things for all people. And the integration of AI into search, yes, brings a lot of capability into it, but it also makes it a lot more complex. And, what is the perception of users when that complexity is introduced? Will people understand and know automatically why they use AI mode versus a traditional search? Or, my question, will people know why they use AI mode versus opening up Gemini to do the same query when, there's so much overlap on these services doing much of the same things, but kind of maybe presenting the information a little bit differently. And that requires work on the user part, on the user side, to understand those differences and to make those decisions at the right place at the right time. So anyways, if you didn't like AI going into this keynote, you and everything that they showed off, you probably didn't enjoy what Google talked about at Google I/O. I will say before I wrap this up that from a perception standpoint, from a talking to people and kind of seeing how they felt, I think in previous years I heard a lot more of the perspective of, oh God, it's just nothing but AI. And I heard a little bit of that this time around. But what I also heard this time around that's a little different is people, it's almost like they've gotten over their resistance and now they've reached the point of acceptance. They're like, yeah, this is just kind of the way it is right now and the way it's going to be. AI is a driving force. Google wants to get us users into the mentality of it's not the technology, it's not the AI that's inside, no pun intended. It's not the AI that's inside all of these products that's the most important piece. It's, do these products do useful things for the people using them? And if AI is the conduit for that, then I think Google believes that, great. The users, their users are getting what they came for. And at the end of the day, that's really what it's all about. Those are just a few of my random thoughts as I contemplate my very long day at Google I/O. I have a bunch of editing to do. The Nick Fox interview is going to be on AI Inside, my AI podcast. I should have that up tomorrow, Wednesday. We also had a wonderful Android interview. And you can check that out on Android Faithful. I was engineering. I wasn't running that interview. But anyways, that should be posted now. And I hope I can't wait to hear what y'all in DTNS land think about Google's announcements. I'll certainly be listening. All right, Tom, back over to you.
Thank you, Jason. And if you want that interview Jason mentioned, keep an eye out at aiinside.show. If you have feedback about anything that gets brought up on this show, get in touch with us on the socials. We are at DTNS Show. There's 2 S's in there, at DTNS Show on X, Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, and Mastodon. For TikTok and YouTube, you can find us at Daily Tech News Show.
We end every episode of DTNS with some shared insight. Today, David has a question.
Yeah, David says, I might have missed it. I didn't hear anything about the Google Voice Assistant, assuming that's the right naming convention anymore, LOL. In other words, what they're doing on the Nest line of smart speakers to keep competitive with the announced features coming to Amazon's A+. February announcements by Panos Panay. I'm the host of the Echo Tips podcast, so I try to keep up with this stuff. Just got a new Nest Mini and a Home Assistant voice, looking to try it out and see what's what. And you're not wrong, David. They didn't say anything about Gemini coming to the smart speakers, the Nest line of smart speakers. PC World did an article about that very thing. Noting that the closest we got to a smart home shout out was Gemini coming to the TV, which Google technically considers part of its smart home offering. And they reminded us that Google has promised Gemini coming to Nest devices. Gemini on Nest speakers has been on a public preview basis for months now. Back in March, Google confirmed a new experience powered by Gemini coming to smart speakers and displays. But you're not wrong. They did not give us any new details at I/O, at least not yet.
What are you thinking about? Have you got some insight into a story? Share it with us over at feedback@dailytechnewsshow.com.
Big thanks to Jason Howell and to David for contributing to today's show. Thank you for being along for the show. Don't forget, we could not do it without you. The show is made possible by our patrons at patreon.com/DTNS. Talk to you tomorrow.
The DTNS family of podcasts, helping each other understand.
Diamond Club hopes you have enjoyed this program.